what it is that has happened for so many dark things to have been normalized in the society. And the hue and cry that comes around when I'm pausing because I wish that law-abiding Jamaicans would let their voices heard against the criminal element in the same way that they often let their voices heard when they raise concerns about the criminal element. The right to due process is non-negotiable. Even the vilest of criminal is entitled to his due process. The minimum standards that are set must be honored. The fact that someone is alleged to have committed a crime does not mean that person stopped being human. But we have to take a stand as a society to make it very clear that the rights that are guaranteed cannot be enjoyed in the way that they should be enjoyed in a society where crime, and in particular violent crimes, are as prevalent as they are. The rights that are guaranteed cannot be enjoyed in a context where violence is used to settle disputes, where murder is used to settle a score. So as we come together to commemorate the promulgation of a document that has set the stage for all of us as individuals and as people, we need to understand that guaranteeing rights on paper is not the same as ensuring that they can be truly enjoyed. And so my approach is not one of lamentation, because we have made progress. We have made progress, and it's important for us to mark the progress. But even as we mark the progress, we must be mindful of the work that is still ahead of us. And rights and responsibilities go hand in hand. Beside the right that is guaranteed to you is your duty to your fellow man and your duty to society. No one is entitled to enjoy their rights in a way that prevents others from also enjoying the rights. I'm looking forward to the conversation. I don't know how long I will be here. The cabinet is sitting, and I ask to be excused so that I can join the conversation. But before I take my seat, I just want to say that in spite of our challenges here on the island, we're still better off than many other places. What is happening in war-torn areas, I don't know if we could endure them, because whatever our challenges are, they sometimes seem to pale in comparison to what happens elsewhere. Jamaica is unmistakably a free and democratic society. I just wish that some people didn't know their rights more than their wrongs, and that we took the approach where, as much as we speak about the rights, because we must speak about them, we also speak about the responsibilities that would ensure that the rights are enjoyed. So our charter, as I say, our charter guarantees to all persons in Jamaica, not just all Jamaicans, but all persons in Jamaica, certain rights that they are entitled to preserve for themselves and for future generations. And these are rights that they are entitled to by virtue of their inherent dignity as persons and as citizens of a free and democratic society. I think perhaps Jamaica has one of the best indication and context for the guarantee of these rights. And so, as I say, as I've said before, and I repeat it, any action that you see that may be of concern to you, taken by the government of Jamaica in a contested space, is action taken to ensure that Jamaicans, all Jamaicans, can enjoy the rights that are guaranteed, not some at the expense of others. The government remains committed to continue the work to ensure that in every area of government, the rights that are guaranteed are honored not just on paper, but honored in a way that makes a difference. I'm really pleased that we have made such progress in our economic management, that we can provide better resources to the institutions that have a role to play, whether it's the Office of Public Defender, the Office of the Children's Advocate, the Independent Commission of Investigations, any of the many offices, to ensure that the work can be done. Ladies and gentlemen who continue to work in the field, please accept my congratulations and my commendations, and to our partners who constantly stand beside us and help us and advocate and through whatever means provide reminder to the government that the guarantees are to be honored. I also want to thank you for your role. I look forward to hearing from others, and I take my seat.
Thank you, Mrs. Marlene Malahoo Fort, and you'd be pleased to know that even though the numbers in the room don't look the way you want them to look, what we're doing here today is being broadcast on Power 106 FM, your old stomping ground. So you'd be pleased. We have 2 shows that are going to be providing coverage of this event. Thank you so very much. Ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together for her once again. And I'm taking my notes. The rights are guaranteed in context. Recognizing that the rights are inalienable is important, but one cannot enjoy rights without the accompanying responsibilities. You teach your children that from early to be responsible, and as they go through life, they take that with them. If we are raising responsible children, they will become responsible adults. Our next presenter. Her Excellency Marianne Van Steen was appointed EU Ambassador to Jamaica in October 2020. She has over 25 years of experience working in diplomacy and international development with the European Union. She's no stranger to the Americas, having completed a highly successful 4-year term as EU Ambassador to Ecuador in 2020. Ambassador Van Steen holds a bachelor's in political science and international relations with honors from the University of Oxford in the United Kingdom and the Catholic University of Leuven in Belgium. She also holds a master's in advanced European studies from the College of Europe, Belgium. Ladies and gentlemen, please make welcome Ambassador Marianne Van Steen.
Thank you very much, Master of Ceremonies. Protocol has been established, but let me please acknowledge Minister. It's a pleasure to see you again. It's been a while. It's going to be very difficult to be as eloquent as you just have been. I thought this was going to be a panel discussion, so I haven't really prepared a long, structured speech. But I'm very honored to be invited here today. I think the topic is not only very timely, it's also extremely important. First of all, I would like to wish you all one day late, but happy International Human Rights Day. As you know, it's 75 years ago that the then world came together. I hope I'm saying that correctly. 1948, 10 December. not signing up, but approving a document in the Declaration, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And I would like to say a couple of words about that, because human rights has become a topic of discussion, which I find sometimes a bit strange, because they are universal, they are indiscriminate, they are interdependent. They were not invented in 1948. Human rights are inherent to, human beings. They've always been there. What happened in 1948 was that out of probably contempt of what happened during the Second World War and out of hope for, let's not let this happen again, let's just formalize them, put them in a piece of paper. We have 30 articles in that declaration, and let's invite all the governments of the world to subscribe to them and to make sure that it's a kind of a guidance for governments to treat every single human being in the same way, with dignity, with respect, without taking into account any of the characteristics that, make people different and that make the world so interesting and humanity so fascinating. So that's the basic. I mean, human rights were not invented, but the point is that human rights, you have to fight for them, and you have to make sure that they're not being taken away from you. So, human rights is also kind of a verb. It's just, it's there, you don't invent it, but you have to make sure that you can continue to enjoy them. I think that's important. The discussion that you were referring to about your rights and where the rights of another person start is extremely important. And I think that is probably the discussion that we need to have when we talk about human rights. I think we all agree, and I think there were like 70 treaties, which are international treaties that were adopted on the basis of the Universal Declaration. Most governments have actually introduced the main principles of the Universal Declaration in their own constitutions. Regional entities such as the EU has also based its founding treaties on those principles. But eventually it's like, how do you make sure they're being promoted on the one hand and respected? And as you say, a debate about where the human right of one person ends and where does it start. It's a difficult one, and I'm very happy you put that on the table. I'm not going to judge about what's happening here in Jamaica and the discussion and the debate. I think this is a very rich debate which needs to be held. I don't think it is up to the European Union to come to another country and to say you have to do A, B, C. What I can do is maybe say that how in an ideal state structure, what would be the most ideal way to make sure that those rights are being respected. And these are very general issues. I mean, it's not like very specific, but I think first of all, you need to have the inspiration. So you need to have, ideally, the principles of the 1948 Declaration enshrined in your constitution, and I think Jamaica has that. So I think that's very important. But then you also, you need to have that legal framework in the constitution, but not only in the constitution. I mean, you need to have that in the different laws that are adopted on the basis of the constitution. So it's very important that there is this check, and that is the work of your ministry, to make sure that all the laws that are being adopted, that exist and that will be adopted in the future, are in line with that constitution. So that's like one major first task I think a government has. And it's not so easy, because many laws, and I mean, again, the discussion starts on, where does the right from one stops and where does the right from another ends. But the legal framework is the second. I mean, apart from the inspiration, the legal framework. The third one is the implementation. It's all very nice to have a constitution and have very good laws, but at the end of the day, they need to be implemented, they need to be respected. There need to be something which is called law enforcement, which is not such a nice word, but it is very important. So therefore, you have inter alia, the Office of the Public Defender, which I think is a very important institution in any single country, We do know that it could be upgraded. And again, I'm not here judging, but we do all know the Paris Principles and the idea to set up a National Institute for Human Rights, which I do also think is something which is on the agenda of the government, and we will be looking at with great attention as to where that goes. But that's the part about implementation. You need to make sure that you actually do what you preach. So that's a very important one as well. And then you need advocacy, because it's not just having the law and having someone looking from high up if the law is being respected. You also need to have that civil society that knows what lives in society, that is in contact with the people, and that makes sure that those rights, if not yet existing, that they are being proposed and adopted to complete the total, entire framework in which human rights should operate. So I really think in every single country in the world, in Europe, in Jamaica, in Latin America, everywhere the role of civil society as an advocate for human rights is extremely important. But then still you have it all together. You have the Constitution, the inspiration, you have the laws, you have the Institute or the Office of the Public Defender, you have the NGOs. When you look at those kids, then you say, you really have to work with those kids, because they are the future, and it's for them that we're doing it. So education is the top priority. We need to make sure that those kids grow up and that they do know that they have rights. And every single citizen should do it, just looking into the eyes of those kids, that it's worth fighting for those human rights. When I say these kids, they were very small. They were like 3 to 4 years old, maybe 5. But one of the things that we are trying to do very strongly now in Europe, and I think it is something which is not only in Europe, is like we reach out, not to those very small kids, but to the youth. I think it's important. The youth, they're not only the future, they're the today, because they're they're preparing for the future. But very importantly, we sit down with them, we see what are their expectations, and we try to involve them in policy making, decision making, because they have the right to form or to have an idea about how their ideal world would be looking like. So I think that's another element which is really important to be looked at when we speak about human rights. And I wanted to say a lot more, but I think I'm going to stop here, because otherwise we won't have time for a panel anymore. So thank you so much.
Thank you so very much, Ambassador Marianne Van Steen. And I hope that you are actually making notes, because there are little nuggets that are being dropped in here that I want you to take back to the various organizations from which you come. Ambassador Van Steen noted, and correctly so, that human rights were not invented in 1948. They were always there, inherent. What happened then was they put in place a system of guidance to treat every human being with dignity and respect. It is important. Once again, thank you so very much, Ambassador. I want to make sure that Minister gets an opportunity to participate in the panel discussion, so I'm ticking along, moving right along, as we introduce to you now Mr. Dennis Zulu. He is the United Nations Resident Coordinator in Jamaica, and he is also responsible for coordinating UN work in the Bahamas, Bermuda, Turks and Caicos, and the Cayman Islands. Mr. Zulu has more than 20 years of experience in international development, the private sector, and academia. Prior to taking up his appointment as the resident coordinator, he served as the director of the International Labour Organization, ILO's Decent Work Team and Office for the Caribbean. There, he led efforts to provide programmatic support and guidance to ILO consultants in identifying and addressing their country's decent work priorities. He also directed the formulation, implementation, monitoring, evaluation, and reporting of the substantive work programs of the Decent Work team. His work helped policy development through the promotion of decent work agenda dimension to social, economic, and environmental policymakers and other stakeholders. Mr. Zulu also served as UN Resident Coordinator for Trinidad and Tobago, Suriname, Aruba, and Curacao from March 2022 to June 2023. And he has also served as ILO's Director for the Anglophone West Africa and as representative to the Economic Commission for West Africa states based in Nigeria from 2015 to 2019. Mr. Zulu holds a master's degree in business administration from Zumbe University, Tanzania, a postgraduate diploma from Stellenbosch University of South Africa, and a Bachelor of Arts degree from the University of Zambia. It's a truly international panel that we have here today. Ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together and welcome Mr. Dennis Zulu.
Good morning. I have a very difficult task this morning because there's been two excellent speakers prior to me coming over, and I can almost claim I'm only 7 weeks old in Jamaica, so I'm the new kid on the block. Minister, delighted to meet you, and hopefully hoping to meet you in more formal. I know you're supposed to be in Geneva. We've been trying to get you there, but you coming up here today is excellent. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, our partners from the European Union, it's indeed a pleasure to be here this morning because I think, as you all know, yesterday was, I don't want to call it a celebration, but I think it was a time for reflection as what's been happening 75 years down the line. As you know, the United Nations, which is yourselves, because people say, you, the United Nations. I say, no, I only work for the United Nations. United Nations is Jamaica, is all these countries across the world who thought it fit many years ago to come together and establish this institution as one global village, really, to be able to work in a coordinated way, but also share common concerns and agree on very important things such as human rights moving forward. So, as you know, the United Nations, and when I say the United Nations, I'm talking about yourselves and ministers here, came up with this agreement 75 years ago, which we now know as the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. As the Director of Ceremony stated, my role or my work with human rights really has for many years been focused around labor rights, because I worked for 20 years for the International Labour Organization, who, as you know, focuses on the promotion of human rights, specifically in the workplace. Today we sit here in a world that, as we know, has plenty of things going on. And some of the things that are going on really make us think true and hard about what the people sitting down at the table 75 years ago talked about and what their plans were all about. Today is not the ideal world in terms of human rights, and this we can talk about for the coming 2-3 days if we wish to. But I'm glad to state that the Minister provided the Jamaican context in terms of what's happening in Jamaica and what we really need to focus on. We also need to recognize the fact that human rights are not static. And as you know, one of the things that women experience as the world is many other challenges, many of the developments. The evolution of technology, for instance. Technology has accentuated the right of freedom of speech. But when you look at it at the other end, it's actually a tool that has also been used to affect people, to violate people's rights. To what extent, then, do we use things like technology, bearing in mind the advantage of using technology, because technology also can be used to promote and advocate and sensitize our people on what their human rights are. Well, the sad thing about technology also is that it's been, as you'll agree with me, used as a tool that actually violates people's rights. So where do we draw the balance? How do we ensure that we manage human rights to the extent that it meets the original principles that our people sat down to discuss and promote 75 years ago? The United Nations, as you know, has a responsibility beyond the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in putting together different treaties and conventions and protocols and recommendations. All these refer to that and say Jamaica is doing excellently well. But beyond domestic law, it's ensuring enforcement, and let me actually add compliance. But you can only comply to a law if you know what the law is all about. And I think that's where a big gap still exists. How many people actually know that they have rights? How many people can actually account and hold governments accountable for the rights that they actually have? The right to housing, the right to education, right? A right to a speedy trial, and all those rights. But how many people actually know that? And I think that's where we need to work more, because once people actually know what their rights are, then they can actually hold the people responsible, accountable for these rights. Because it's well and good for us to sit and talk about human rights, but the actual people who need to know and hold the duty bearers accountable do not know what human rights are. They actually think governments or partners actually doing them a favor. It's not a favor they're doing. It's an obligation on the parts of those responsible to deliver human rights. I also particularly like the fact that I think Ambassador Stein talked about educating. Where I come from in Africa, we say the trees of today are the forests of tomorrow. So we need to ensure that the young people, the young girls who were here early on, know about human rights. We've just spent the last 16 days of activism talking about gender-based violence and the violation of women and girls in Jamaica. And one of the things that actually comes through is the fact that some of these women and girls who are violated do not know that they actually have a right. And that's a right to be protected against any violations. All right? The right to be heard when they're violated. So it's important as we sit here today and discuss and think back 75 years along the line, what is it that we need to do more of? How do we play our individual part and role to ensure that we do our bit? Because ultimately, we're all responsible as individuals, as governments, as civil society, as groups, as youths, to ensure that the declaration lives on, and each one of us who are also entitled to these human rights benefits from human rights. Looking forward to further discussion on this, and yes, it's a lot to think about and a lot to talk about. But I should thank the public Office of the Public Defender for inviting us, because I think it's one of the things that we're supposed to do more and more, working, sensitizing, educating, and partnering. Thank you so much.
Thank you so very much, Mr. Zulu. My nugget from him: how many people know that they have rights and can hold governments and other institutions accountable? Delivering human rights is an obligation. And the saying from the country, the trees of today are the forests of tomorrow. Beautiful. Put your hands together for him once again. All right, so I know that we're anxious to get the panel discussion underway. So what I'm going to do, I'm taking liberty as the moderator. I'm going to invite the entire panel to make their way to their seats, and I'm going to invite comment from Diane Gordon Harrison and Mr. Bailey of just 2 minutes each, so that we can get the panel discussion underway. But I invite the entire panel to make their way to their seats, so that we can engage in the conversation, which I know many of us are anxious to hear. So these chairs that are on the stage here, those are your seats. I see PD making her way to her seat. No, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter, wherever you're comfortable. But don't sit, Mrs. Harrison, because I want you to come and give me your 2 minutes. And then I'll take Mr. Bailey's 2 minutes, and then we jump right into the panel discussion. All right, so let me just see if I can introduce Diane Gordon Harrison, because she's a lady that I have interviewed over the years many times, and she has not only the best interest of our children at heart, but I think the entire nation. And let me make sure that I can locate it. I know it is here somewhere. Mrs. Diane Gordon Harrison has been the Children's Advocate of Jamaica since 2012, January 2012 to be exact, and she has been Jamaica's National Rapporteur on Trafficking in Persons since March 2015, making her the first to hold a post in Latin American and Caribbean region. She's an attorney at law by profession with over 20 years' experience and has practiced at the public bar since her graduation from the Norman Manley Law School. Prior to her appointment as Children's Advocate, Mrs. Gordon Harrison served as a Deputy Director of Public Prosecutions within the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions. She's well known for her advocacy skills, and you can hear that coming out in every conversation she has these days. She states that her current role provides a national and regional platform from which to promote the rights of children and other people in vulnerable circumstances from a victim-centered and rights-based organization. She's also passionate about accountability frameworks through which persons who violate the rights of children and vulnerable persons can be held responsible for their actions. Mrs. Gordon Harrison, believe it or not, I don't know how she finds time to do this, but she's an associate tutor at the Norman Manley Law School, has also been an external reviewer for the British Council in Jamaica, and has been designated champion for CARICOM's regional sex guidelines for courts. In November 2019, she was certified as a global expert by the Geneva-based Justice Rapid Response roster of global experts in international criminal law for potential deployment worldwide with a focus on crimes against humanity, war crimes, and international human rights law. So you can hear why she had to be here today. Since 2020, she has been serving as a member of the Board of Directors for the International Society for the Prevention of Child Abuse and Neglect, a United States-based nonprofit organization that works in over 200 countries worldwide. Ladies and gentlemen, please make welcome Diane Gordon Harrison, Children's Advocate and National Rapporteur on Trafficking in Persons.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, my fellow panelists, and distinguished ladies and gentlemen, all members of the media. So like the speakers who preceded me, I have no notes, but as I thought about some thoughts that I wanted to share with you, I wanted to start from a note of gratitude. So Public Defender, thank you for the invitation and for really giving me the opportunity to say something that I consider a missing part of the puzzle on many times when we have significant and symbolic days such as International Human Rights Day. When we talk about human rights in Jamaica, and to some extent the Caribbean, what remains a missing component is the recognition that children are actually human beings. It sounds as if I'm being overly dramatic, and it may sound as if I'm speaking something that is or ought to be obvious. But certainly as we assess the landscape, and as we look at the nature and scale of the issues that impact children, it remains a very, very obvious deficit that people believe that children are not actually human beings that have full rights, that are entitled to participate in discussions, that are entitled to have their own views, and that are entitled to the full scale of protection as articulated in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And so this opportunity, I think, is one that we at the Office of the Children's Advocate recognize as not only being symbolic and as a call for action, as the language likes to describe it, but really as a very critical opportunity to remind persons that this Universal Declaration includes the component or the subset of children's rights. Now, when you think about the theme for today, freedom, equality, and justice for all, well, the theme for yesterday, but the theme for this year, 2023, the freedom that I want us to reflect upon for children in my 2 minutes is their freedom to be free from violence and to be free from all sorts of exploitation. And that exploitation is not only at the hands of those whom we designate as criminals and terrorists and wrongdoers, but even at the hands of those who are supposed to be providing primary care for them and those adults who are in their lives as major architects of their protection. Because what we see is a persistent representation in the data whereby it's people who have access to children and who have the opportunity to care for them that predominantly are the ones that overwhelmingly are violating those rights. So let's focus on that freedom in the theme for this year. In terms of equality, equality to really express views that they're qualified to express despite their age. Many times we talk about freedom from discrimination and we look at sex and gender and race and so on. But what about age discrimination, where we think that the ideas and the thoughts of children are a little less important because it's coming from a 12-year-old or from a 13-year-old? I think as a country, Jamaica needs to recognize that having ratified the United Nations far back as 1991, making us the second nation in the Caribbean to do so, coming only second after Belize that did it in 1989, children have a right under that convention to participate in decisions that impact their own lives. We have ascribed to that as well in our Child Care and Protection Act, which is our domestic legislation, but we're not truly honoring that. One example, I think I'd like to raise very briefly, that the Office of the Children's Advocate tries to embrace that particular participatory right in, is through our Children's Advisory Panel, where we sit and caucus with children on issues that impact them and issues that they want to see us advocate for them on, and also raise in terms of policy directive and legislation. So we're really involving in a proactive way the voice of the child and paying homage to that right to participate. So equality in terms of participation. And the last critical word, I think, in the theme for this year is justice. What does justice look like for children? And my hope is that we can see children accessing justice in ways that are unfettered and in ways that are fair and in ways that are consistent, despite the socioeconomic status from which those children come, and despite who those children may or may not be connected to. I think the universality of the right to access justice is not just for big people, but we have a history in Jamaica now, unfortunately, where children are active users of our justice sector, both as victims, witnesses, and unfortunately as perpetrators. So what does due process look like for them in keeping with the systems of justice that we have? What are the principles that we're willing to hold ourselves accountable to ensure that we are not compromising any of the rights or best interests of children as we seek to do what we must? And so in those few words, I want to have us leaving here remembering human rights. It means children as well. They're alive and well. And the children of today, as we say, will not be the future. As far as I'm concerned, they're the present. And if we don't inculcate and care for and nurture the present, it means we're setting ourselves up for a very, very troubling future, because we would not have equipped them with the tools that they need to really actualize their full potential and to be able to contribute to the development of our country. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Diane Gordon Harrison, Children's Advocate. And of course, the nugget, you must not leave here without in this room without recognizing that children are actually human beings. And we grew up in an era where children were to be seen and not heard. And I think many of us still carry that with us, unfortunately so. So thank you so very much, Mrs. Gordon Harrison, for taking us back to that and to that recognition that we need to pay greater attention to the equality of our children in expressing their views despite their age. And as a country and a people, we need to recognize that children have a right to participate in decisions that impact their lives. Thank you so very much once again. The final introduction that I'm going to do is that of Paul Bailey, who currently serves as Director of Legal Services in the Ministry of Justice, MOJ, where he supports the delivery of the ministry's legislation program and leads a group of attorneys in the provision of general legal services and general legal advice to the Permanent Secretary and the Minister of Justice. Prior to joining the MOJ, Mr. Bailey served as legal officer and was promoted to senior legal officer at the Ministry of National Security, where he was integrally involved as the legal technical lead on several complex priority legislations, including the MOCA Act and the New Firearms Act. He has also contributed to amendments to several crucial pieces of legislation to include the Proceeds of Crime Act and the anti-gang legislation. Now, beyond this, Mr. Bailey has served on numerous committees to include the National Anti-Money Laundering Committee. He obtained his legal education certificate from NMLS and a bachelor's in law obtained at the UWI Mona, and also has training and certification in project management and leadership development. He's motivated by what he deems an unwavering mandate to be a professional characterized by not only intellectual astuteness, but more importantly, integrity and fair-mindedness. Ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together and welcome Paul Bailey.
The Ministry of Justice to human rights. In the very mission of the ministry, we say that aimed at facilitating effective access to justice for all. The for all indicates that there's a recognition and a support for human rights. So I won't detain you any longer because I know that we're all awaiting the rich discussion that must take place with this panel discussion. So I just thank you for all being here as we look forward to this discussion coming up.
Thank you, Mr. Bailey, and I'm going to adopt you for radio. Yes, thank you so very much. Ladies and gentlemen, so the reason we're here is to have a robust panel discussion. My panelists are not going to sit up here and answer only the questions that I'm posing to them, but we expect to take questions from the floor. We'll also have an opportunity for those who are online to send their questions in as well. And so as we go throughout the conversation, we expect to, I want you to put up your hands. This is classroom, and we'll take the microphone to you. We'll get a microphone to you so you can ask your question. It is important for us to engage in this.
By the entire society, not just the government, but I believe that the government is leading well. We're coming from a long way, and we can be proud of the progress that we have made. Not to be complacent, because a lot more work needs to be done.
And you've worked at several levels of the justice system. So from that perspective, what more, if anything, do you think can be done to better protect human rights?
I think because of the high level of crime and violence in the society, there has been a lot of tension in the society around rights. And what has been absent from the conversation is the responsibility framework for rights. And so I was deliberate in my own remarks in reminding persons that the rights and freedoms that are guaranteed under the Constitution of Jamaica are guaranteed within a responsibility framework. They are not absolutely guaranteed, and so we have to ensure that not only government, but government has to lead, but the entire society has a role to play because we live together, we operate together. And unfortunately, there is no safe haven that we can separate ourselves. I know some may be under the impression that we can buy ourselves a safe space, but the truth is that we live and exist communally. And so the work has to be done by the entire society. The work that is, the framework is set in the Constitution, and we now have to move to pass primary legislation around the rights and responsibility framework that the Ministry of Legal and Constitutional Affairs is embarking on.
All right. Thank you so very much for that. And of course, one of the things that I want you to recognize is that when the panelists speak, if there's any point that they have raised to which you want to respond or ask a follow-up question, I will allow you to do so. Is there any member of the panel who would like to comment on what Minister has just said? All right, so we're good. All right, so I want to take a look now at how societies globally work towards consolidating a human rights culture and ensuring its sustainability into the future? And Ambassador Van Steen, I'm coming to you for this one. How can societies globally work towards consolidating a human rights culture?
That's not an easy one. Maybe that's one to be answered by my colleague and friend from the UN. I do think, indeed, that there's work that can be done at a global level, that it's not just, within the countries. We have seen the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which is a kind of a multilateral instrument or inspiration, guidance. And we do have a set of institutions at the level of the UN that is actually looking at, how those human rights are being respected in the different countries all over the world. And I think, yes, that is important. We're not there to preach, and we're not there to say what is right and wrong, but the basic, universal human rights, we do think that we can come out and talk with and tell them, listen, this is what we think. It is not a kind of like, it's not the EU versus Jamaica, or it's not France versus Germany, or it is a multilateral system where different countries all over the world, for instance, will carry out universal periodic reviews, and they will look at a country and they will say, hey, we have been assessing what you've been